That click does mean we're ready though, right?
Yeah.
All right. What would you do if you had more time in the day? Say if the day wasn't just 24 hours long. What if it was 25, or what if it was 30? I want you to genuinely think about your answer, because I don't want basic answers like I'd play more video games or I would catch up on homework or something like that. Just think bigger than that. Like, what does your heart really long for? Or what are some desires that you have, or things you want to do, skills you want to learn, places you want to go, but you just simply don't have enough time in the day as is? If you're up for it, I would even love for you to just kind of pause. Or if you have your phone out right now and you're watching this on your phone, pause it in just a second. If you don't have your phone right now, go get it and pause it in just a second, because somewhere in your settings, you can find your average screen time, the average amount of time that you spend on your phone. So go ahead right now and look at it. We'll wait or something. I don't know. Is there elevator music we can play here? I don't say this to be like brutally blunt or just to shame you or whatever, but for the majority of you, if you were looking for more time in the day, it seems like you've found it. Now, just fair warning before we just dive in a little deeper here, anytime someone kind of stands up and touches on an issue that the majority of people are dealing with, it can come across as an attack. And I want to preface this whole message by saying that I'm not here to attack you or to pour salt in a wound or anything like that. I'm merely pointing out that there is a wound and that we need to take steps to heal it before infection spreads. So I'm coming to you as your pastor, or if you're just watching this from not my church, then a pastor who still deeply loves you and cares for you and wants to see Christ formed in you. And it is out of that love that I'm going to point out a problem in hopes that we can come to a solution. Okay? So with that in mind, we are addicted to our devices. In the past, the term addiction could used to be saved for something that was actually chemically addictive, such as like alcohol, nicotine, and illegal drugs. But in 2013, the 5th edition of the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders came out. And it's basically the manual when it comes to mental health. And in it, for the first time, the term addiction moved from just being substance-based to being behavior-based, meaning professionals concluded that people could be addicted to what they did rather than what they ingested. And in that context, it's helpful to define addiction like this. Addiction is a condition in which a person engages in use of a substance or in a behavior for which the rewarding effects provide a compelling incentive to repeatedly pursue the behavior despite detrimental consequences. Basically, we don't care what the negative consequences are. If it feels good, we're just going to keep on doing it, which is why we can't stop looking at our phones. In the 1970s, psychologist Michael Zeller experimented on pigeons. He was looking to discover how reward systems could be used by the government to encourage charity and discourage crime. But before fleshing his ideas out with people, he decided to build research based on pigeons. And he set up a button that pigeons could waddle up to and peck, and during different testing periods, he programmed that button to do different things. So in some trials, the button was programmed to release food pellets every single time it was pressed, producing a consistent reward for a certain action, in this case pecking. And in other trials, Zeller would program the button to release pellets only sporadically. So no matter how many times a pigeon waddled up to it and pecked it, they would only get rewarded some of the time, and it would always be at random. And you would think that the button that consistently popped out pellets would be the most one pecked, right? Like, it makes sense. You're hungry, you want a treat, press a button, boom, you get fed. But that's not what happened. In fact, it turns out that the pigeons pecked almost twice as often when the reward wasn't guaranteed. Why? It's because their brains were releasing way more dopamine, which is that feel-good chemical that your brain produces when the reward was unexpected. So what's this have to do with being addicted to your phone? Unexpected rewards end up producing more dopamine in pigeons, but also in us. Meaning you reach for your phone with the hopes that when you look at it, you will be unexpectedly rewarded with a notification, a text, a comment, a like, thus releasing dopamine that makes you feel pleasure. And it's no wonder why we reach for our phone anytime we have just even a hint of boredom. Because like the gambling addict, we just can't stop playing the slots, always pulling the lever, checking our phone, refreshing Instagram, opening Snapchat, in hopes that we will end up with some kind of a reward. Which is an apt metaphor actually, because did you know that slot machines make more money in the United States than the movie industry, baseball, and theme parks combined? How do they do it? Because all the while they're just taking 1 or 2 quarters at a time. First, they're successful because it's addictive. Those unexpected rewards you get when you actually win a few bucks feels good, like we love those dopamine hits. And second, they're successful because those small amounts really seem inconsequential in the moment. It's just a quarter here or 50 cents there, maybe even $1. It's no big deal, right? But over time, those add up to astronomical amounts. And the same thing goes for your phone. I'm sure at the beginning of this, you didn't expect to pull out your phone and see your screen time to be like this crazy high number. I mean, you only check Instagram in the bathroom or Twitter at a stoplight. It's just small amounts here and there. It's not like you're wasting your life on it. But just like with the slot machines, those small amounts throughout the day end up eating a large portion of your time. And I'll prove it to you. The average iPhone user touches their phone 2,617 times a day, which is a problem within itself because, as Pastor John Tyson points out, it's 2,617 micro reminders that the world should work the way that we want it to. Only content we want to see, only people we want to hear from, pages we want to follow, and we wonder why we are statistically lonely and divided so much more than any other generation before us. You may be thinking, well, it's 5 minutes here or a quick scroll there. Sometimes I just unlock my phone out of habit. So what is the big deal? The big deal is this. Your generation, if you are Gen Z watching this, spends an average of 7 hours and 22 minutes of every day staring at your phone. Almost a full work day, not including any schoolwork. Our phones have completely captured our attention through addiction, and it's actually by design. Sean Parker, the first president of Facebook, said this: "God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains." The thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you more likes and comments. It's a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because listen to this part. You're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. Have you ever considered that the apps that you open were designed to steal your time and attention? Sean Parker isn't the only one to own up to it. There's another former Facebook employee, the former vice president of growth, put it more bluntly. He says, "We want to psychologically figure out how to manipulate you as fast as possible and then give you back that dopamine hit." Which is crazy to think about, like exploit us and manipulate us. Like, I'm pretty sure Facebook's mission statement is to like connect the world or something like that. Like it seems like these companies are all about bringing people together through the power of the internet. Why is it that we're getting all of these ex-employees saying stuff like, "We want to psychologically manipulate you"? It's because you are not the consumer. You are the product. And just think about it for a second. It used to be that companies made money by strictly selling something. Like you bought a car and the dealership made a profit, or you go through the drive-thru, the restaurant rakes in a few bucks. But for tech giants, it's not necessarily a tangible product that they're selling. But social media companies are among the wealthiest companies that have ever existed in human history. Just to put it into perspective for you, ExxonMobil, the oil company, is worth around $370 billion. Facebook is worth over $500 billion. How is that possible when the products they offer are completely free to use. Roger McNamee, an early investor in Facebook, words it pretty well. He says, the first 50 years of Silicon Valley, the industry made products like hardware and software and sold them to consumers. Nice, simple business. For the last 10 years, the biggest companies in Silicon Valley have been in the business of selling their users. And as the saying goes, if you are not paying for the product, then you are the product. Social media companies simply are making money off of your data and your attention, specifically through very intentional advertising. I'm sure that you've experienced this before, but looking up a product or talking about it and then almost instantly opening a social media app and seeing ads for that specific product. It happens all the time. And it's because social media companies record every online move that you make in order to figure out how you're going to spend the money that's in your wallet. And if they get it right, their advertisers will continue to pay them big bucks in order to push their products to your screens because you are actually buying them. Tristan Harris, a former Google employee, says it this way: all of the things that we've ever done, all the clicks that we've made, all the videos we've watched, all the likes, that all gets brought back into building a more and more accurate model. The model, once you have it, can predict the kind of things that person does, where you're gonna go, what kind of videos you'll keep watching, what emotions will trigger you. And then they sell your attention to the highest bidder in order to make a profit. It's called the attention economy, where corporations treat your attention, or what one author I read called eyeball minutes, as a commodity to be bought and sold. It's a business plan that they're honestly just not even attempting to hide. Just hear it for yourself from the former president of Pinterest. He says, let's figure out how to get as much of this person's attention we possibly can. How much time can we get you to spend? How much of your life can we get you to give to us? And I'll say it again, we are addicted to our phones, and it's by design, and a very good design at that. That's why Yale professor Edward Tufte said there are only two industries that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software. And like a drug user, we can expect there to be some negative consequences to us using. Like, have you ever just kind of taken a step back and asked yourself, like, what is all this time spent behind screens doing to you? Or what kind of a person is it turning you into? If our attention is this prized commodity that is making tech companies billions of dollars, then what happens when we give into that addiction and start to spend our lives staring at our screens? In short, it's nothing good. Gene Twenge, a psychologist who studies differences in generations, wrote an article in The Atlantic in 2017 called "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" In comparing Generation Z to generations in the past, she noticed a few significant changes. Statistically, Gen Z is not hanging out with friends as much. Fewer and fewer of them are getting their driver's license, preferring instead to stay at home. They go on less dates than generations prior, and they're having less sex than generations prior. Gen Z is also way more likely to feel lonely, despite being the most connected generation than any other generation before them. And they are less likely to get a decent amount of sleep, which heavily contributes to poor mental health. Speaking of which, your mental health, Gen Z's mental health, is deteriorating at a pace that simply has never been seen before. In Twenge's own words in her article, she says it's not an exaggeration to describe iGen, her term for your generation, as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Author Cal Newport, who wrote the book Digital Minimalism, often travels to speak at universities. And one particular time he was chatting with the head of a mental health service for a university that he was about to speak at. And she told him that she started seeing these major shifts in the mental health of students that were coming in. Like in the past, the mental health center saw just the standard mix of teenage issues that have been prevalent for decades, stuff like homesickness or eating disorders, some depression, and the occasional case of OCD. But suddenly, everything changed. Seemingly overnight, the incoming class of students seeking counseling started experiencing something that we are very familiar with, but actually used to be relatively rare: anxiety. And when Cal asked what caused the change, without hesitation, she answered, "It probably has to do something with smartphones." In Cal's own words, the sudden rise in anxiety-related problems coincided with the first incoming classes of students that were raised on smartphones and social media. She noticed that these new students were constantly and frantically processing and sending messages. It seemed clear that the persistent communication was somehow messing with the students' brain chemistry. Twenge again said, "These shifts in mental health correspond exactly to the moment when American smartphone ownership became ubiquitous. Meaning, once the majority of people in America actually owned a smartphone, our mental health got monumentally worse." And she's not wrong. In the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, one researcher pointed out that hospitalizations for girls who self-harmed went up drastically starting in 2009. Even worse, the suicide rates have skyrocketed since 2009, particularly among middle school girls, which leads you to the question, what happened in 2009 to cause such a drastic shift? 2009 was the date that the App Store started carrying social media apps on their platform. And even just a month ago, the United States Senate met with Instagram representatives. They were holding the company accountable because recent internal research showed that Instagram knew that their app was destroying the mental health of teenage girls, specifically when it came to body image, but are ultimately doing nothing about it. Our addiction is simply affecting our health in ways that we cannot afford to ignore. Which is why late night host Bill Maher? I don't know. Bill says this: "The tycoons of social media have to stop pretending that they're friendly nerd gods building a better world and admit that they're just tobacco farmers in t-shirts selling an addictive product to children. Because let's face it, checking our likes is the new smoking." And then he ends his monologue with this: "Philip Morris, which is the largest tobacco company in the United States, just wanted your lungs. The App Store wants your soul." What you do with your attention does something to you, for better or for worse. Don't you just long for it to be for better? Like, wouldn't you rather be formed by the character of Jesus rather than by your phone? Or don't you want to be able to invert all of these statistics about how we are deteriorating and we're full of anxiety and depression? Don't you want to completely reverse those from life-stealing to life-giving instead? To not be a person who is riddled with anxiety or struggling with depression or is constantly fighting off suicidal thoughts or dealing with body image issues. How can you begin to move away from all of that and step into life in the kingdom with Jesus? Life that he called eternal and life to the full. Life marked by the fruits of the Holy Spirit, which are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Jesus wants to form that in you. So how do you allow him? Through the practice of simplicity, specific to this message, digital simplicity. Now, I realize this can be a daunting task. Any addiction is difficult to break, especially one that is so socially accepted like digital addiction is. But it is something that can be accomplished through the grace of God, the power of the Spirit, and a willingness in you and I to simply live a better life. There will be some practical steps that we're going to take together, but behind it all, we have to start with reclaiming that which has been stolen from us, our attention, so we can rightly direct it back toward God. It was the poet Mary Oliver who said, "Attention is the beginning of devotion." What we give our attention to is what we end up giving our life to. As followers of Jesus, we want to give our life to God for the sake of his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And I don't know about you, but I just don't want to give my life over to software engineers in Silicon Valley. I don't want Twitter's Jack Dorsey to have my life, or Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, or TikTok, who is still owned by China, by the way, and is collecting more data from you than any other social media app out there. Your contacts, what you save on your clipboard, your location. And as they just updated their privacy policy about a month or two ago, your biometric data, meaning your face and your voice. My life, your life, is just so much more valuable than that. It is more than data that is to be compiled and sold to make a profit. So if you want to give your life over to something that is far, far better by giving your attention to something far, far better, we can find a starting place in Paul's letter to the Romans. In that letter, Paul was addressing a group of house churches in Rome, which was the epicenter of civilization at that time. It was a place of culture, innovation, and power, much like America is today. And there were two groups within the church that were behaving contrary to the way of Jesus. They were arguing over the best way to follow him, which practices they needed to keep, and which ones they wanted to toss out, ultimately allowing for division to set in among the church. But division is something that the world is known for. It is not something that the church should be known for. Ultimately, it makes our preferences the center of our faith rather than the gospel of the kingdom. So Paul spends the first 11 chapters addressing this problem, and he starts out chapter 12 by offering us a solution. He says, starting in verse 1, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." Bodies in the Greek there being the word soma, meaning your entire being, not just this outer shell that houses your organs. And he gets a little more specific in the next verse. "Do not conform to the pattern of this world," the world being the spirit of our age that kind of seeks to squeeze us into a particular mold, excluding God from the picture. "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his pleasing and perfect will." That word transformed in Greek is metamorphao. It's where we get our English word metamorphosis, is in the process a caterpillar goes through to change into a butterfly. So Paul was telling his audience that they are to become a completely different creature, not mimicking the world of Rome around them with all of its customs and its practices that exclude God from the picture, but to be transformed into the image of Christ by renewing their minds. Paul is pointing toward one place as the place of transformation in our lives. It is the mind and all that it encompasses. What you think about, what you dwell on, and ultimately what you give your attention to. I love Eugene Peterson's translation of that last verse, Romans 12:2. "Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out." Don't be so well adjusted to your culture that you scroll endlessly without even thinking about it, or that you become digitally distracted, or that you freely give your attention away to people who are only looking to profit from it. Instead, fix your attention on God. That is how you go through that transformation process. That's how you become a completely new creature. Hui Hui Tan, a Christian author out of Singapore, puts it like this: "That's the profound truth. You are what your mind looks at. You are what you contemplate." The question comes down to this: what kind of a person do you want to become? Do you want to conform to this world, basing your worth off of likes, accepting anxiety and depression as just something that is normal to everyday living, not being present to the person who is sitting across the table from you, let alone being present to the maker of your soul? Or do you long to be a new creation, to become like the person of Jesus, who, no matter your personal view of him as Savior or not, had the most desirable inner life imaginable? I mean, he was someone that was non-anxious. He was never in a hurry. He was connected to God the Father at a deep, transformative level. And he was filled with patience and love and peace and joy despite what circumstances presented themselves. The choice is one that I can't make for you. It is ultimately up to you to decide. But if it is the life that Jesus has to offer, then to that end, I have a few things that you can do to kind of help meet that goal and direct your attention away from your phones and back toward God. So these are experiments that you can try out. Keep in mind that Paul said that you transform by renewing your mind. It implies something that is not just a one-time, one-and-done thing, but it's something that you consistently do day after day. So as difficult as it may be, I want to encourage you, if you want to abide in Jesus, then just stick with it. Breaking addictions is really hard at first, and you might even experience withdrawals. But I've never met an addict on the other side of recovery who longs to go back to their life in chains. So you can be the person that Jesus wants you to be. Do not lose hope. You have that same spirit, if you're a follower of his, that raised him from the dead, and it now resides in you. Lean on that for strength as we move forward. So I'll start with some really simple experiments to allow you to kind of dip your toe in the water if you're not sure of getting rid of your phone completely. And then I'll give you one big one if you want to join with us and dive in head first. But I do have to make something clear before I give you these 5 experiments. You have to find something else to fix your attention on, no matter what experiments you try out. The saying goes that nature abhors a vacuum, so when you suddenly free up like 7 hours and 22 minutes of your time, something will come in to fill that space. I want you to be very intentional about what fills that space. Think back to our earlier question of what would you do if you had more time in the day? You could do something along those lines or do something you're really passionate about. And of course, make sure to allocate some of that time toward Jesus because he's the one that we want to be formed into after all. And I'm not saying spend like 7+ hours in prayer, but definitely start giving him more of your attention. Start with where you are, not where you think you should be. And if you can't read your Bible for like 5 minutes or whatever, you can read it for 4 and then hope to come up a little bit. Keep in mind that this is a lifelong journey and it's going to take practice day after day. So 5 experiments. Here we go. Number 1, you can turn off notifications on your devices. Your phone is supposed to be a tool that you use, not something that uses you. And I have a handful of tools in my garage, and none of them just barge into my living room demanding me to use them. My phone, on the other hand, does, and it does so from right inside of my pocket all the time. The easiest way to give less attention to your phone is to simply turn off alerts and notifications. If you really want to see what's going on with your friends, you can schedule times throughout the day where you check your favorite apps or your messages, but make sure it's on your terms, not when your device tells you that you have a new like or comment. Second thing you can try out is to limit screen time. I didn't include the exact statistics, but studies show without exception that the more time a person spends on a screen, the less happy they are, without exception. So what you can do is limit how much you spend, limit how much time you spend on your devices. My phone has an app that just comes with the phone called Digital Wellbeing, where I can just schedule certain times on apps, and once I hit, say, like the 15-minute mark or whatever I choose, the app just completely shuts off and I can't get on it for the rest of the day. You can see, if you have an iPhone, you can see if it does something similar, or you can just set a goal for yourself and just kind of monitor your screen time depending on what goal you set. And if you're really, pro level here, you can just delete all of your social media apps altogether and just when you want to access them through your web browser. Third thing you can do is called the digital rule of life. If that language is new to you, we've done a little bit of work on a rule of life on our YouTube channel. You can go walk through that and it will help explain it a little bit. But a rule of life is basically just limits and guidelines that help kind of direct you into the life that you really want to live. So along with my overall rule of life, my set of practices, I include a digital rule of life as well, something that kind of guides me for how I want to live in the world in the 21st century and in the digital age. And I'll share a few of my digital rule of life practices with you, and you can steal some of mine, come up with your own. What works for me might not work for you. So just try it out and write your rule of life in pencil. So some of mine, God touches my mind before my phone. So in the morning, I read my Bible before checking my phone. I have a rule of only one screen at a time. I don't want to be scrolling on my phone while also watching TV. I want to give my full attention to what's in front of me. I have a rule of no phone at the table when people are around, like when we're eating together, because again, I want to give my full attention to whoever may be in front of me, not trying to have a conversation while also checking the score of the Stars game or whatever it may be. And lastly, I have one that's no phone when people I know are around, which is kind of tough at times. I'm still working on that one, but give me a little bit of grace here. But you know the life that you want to live, so I want to encourage you to be intentional with that life and make your phone conform to who you want to be, not the other way around. Fourth thing you can try out is parent your phone. The idea here is to treat your phone like a child, so you can set bedtimes and wake times for your devices. You could say that you're going to put your phone up in a separate room at 9 p.m. and you are not going to get it until like 7 a.m. or whatever it may be. The goal behind this is to not let your phone influence your sleep or your late night thoughts, which it often does. This is particularly useful if you are struggling with a pornography issue or a body image issue or anxiety. Make your phone go to sleep before you do, and then wake it up only after you have spent time with God. That way you can give attention to Him rather than everything that is wrong with the world. And lastly, number 5, this is the pro level move that we are all at The Forge doing together, starting at the date that this releases on YouTube. It's called the Digital Detox. It's taken from Cal Newport's book, Digital Minimalism, and it's a strategy that he has tested on his readers, and it works. He calls it a digital declutter, but I'm going to call it a detox because our phones are slowly killing us like poison, and I think that we need to purge our bodies from it. It has 3 steps that I will walk you through. I encourage you to write these steps down if you actually want to follow through with this. And so you can refer back to it later without having to open YouTube on a screen. So first, put aside a 30-day period during which you will take a break from optional technologies in your life. So a whole month where you're taking a break from optional technology. Something is optional if it doesn't support the things that you value. And as we've seen, social media doesn't necessarily support a lot of life in the kingdom with God. But it could also mean using TV or video games or your Apple Watch or any other piece of technology. If you happen to use like technology for school or work, then of course use it, but set limits for yourself. Like for example, most of the time I need Instagram for Wednesdays so I can keep in touch with my students. So I'll download it on Wednesdays, and after these videos go up, I delete it on Thursdays. So, and also I need my computer for work, but I don't necessarily bring this home with me and start scrolling as I'm just like bored or whatever. So I will still be using this during this time period. But decide what is optional for you and just be strict about it. And just a tip here, TikTok is optional. So is Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Honestly, so is television, but I'm not going to decide for you. You can decide for yourself and just be ruthless about it. This will work well only if you're willing to be honest about what is actually optional in your life. Second step you can take. During this 30-day break, explore and rediscover activities and behaviors that you find satisfying and meaningful. This is something that's called focal practices, or what Cal Newport calls high quality leisure time. This is that kind of stuff that we answered earlier, like what do you really long to do? What do you, if you had more time in the day, what would you give your attention to? You might want to take up cooking or painting or cycling or just walking through nature. The sky is the limit here, and obviously you want to be sure to include some time to just bring your soul back to God. If you don't intentionally fill this new void with something, you will spend a few days detoxing and you will be miserable and you will end up caving in, installing all your apps again. So be very conscious of what you do with your time here. This is a crucial step in the process. And it helps to think about the person you want to become and then reverse engineer that person. How do you become that kind of person? Like, what activities does that person do, or how do they spend their time? Go do those things, or again, consult the question earlier of what would you do if you had more time in the day. Step 3, last one. At the end of the break, at the end of 30 days, you reintroduce optional technologies in your life, starting from a completely blank slate. And for each technology you reintroduce, determine what value it serves in your life and how specifically you will use it to maximize that value. So if you determine, for instance, that you value connecting with friends and you decide to bring back Instagram, then do it, but have rules for it. I had a friend who recently just unfollowed everyone that he didn't personally know, because if he is trying to connect with people, then why would he just follow a bunch of pages that just promote products? My wife told me recently that she unfollowed fashion bloggers and home design stuff, not because necessarily they were not connecting her with people, but because they just made her feel bad about herself and her stuff, and we don't want that. So use technology to serve your purpose within the kingdom. And when you're ready to add stuff back in, it's very helpful to ask these 2 questions. First, does this technology specifically directly support something that I deeply value? And number 2, is this technology the best way to support that value? Spoiler alert, Twitter isn't the best way to get your news and know what's happening in the world, and Snapchat just isn't the best way to connect with your friends. It is a very shallow connection. Maybe instead, if you really do value knowing what's going on in the world, subscribe to like a daily notification that gets sent to your inbox, or you subscribe to a news site. Or if you really do value your friends, I don't know, just maybe go hang out with them. Go see a movie, go to IHOP, whatever you want to do. You don't just have to send pictures to keep up with your streaks. Technology can serve your purposes, but it's often just a cheap substitute for face-to-face interactions. So determine what you value. Try to find ways to bring technology into alignment with that value, using it as a tool to support how you want to live. So to bring all of this to a close, this is an invitation from me and from the way of Jesus to live a better life. It is not coercion in any shape, form, or fashion. But this digital detox is a proven way for you to get your life back, to get your attention to move from self back to God. And I think that you'll find through the whole process, but the detox specifically, that you're going to feel a lot closer to God, as tough as it may be at first. And honestly, I am very excited, and I can't wait to see what happens in your life as you start to give more of your attention to God and less attention to your devices. You are going to grow exponentially, and I can't wait to watch it happen. I want to see desperately God's Spirit bring revival across Generation Z and across the church in America at large. But I can't help but think that He's just waiting for a small group of people to start paying attention to Him before it happens. So let's be that people. Throw your phones in the garbage. Grace and peace to you. I love you. We're done. That's it. Simplicity's over.
Run the bloopers.
Can you Photoshop this? If I chuck it. Huh? Fix that in post.